A new world order, the thing that Hitler was planning during the World War II, is true today, but not the way that he thinks. In this new world order, the US is considered the only world power. Let's start with some important concepts of today's new world order. Globalization. In general terms, globalization is the interchange of world products. This helps in the developing of other countries, giving them access to the biggest markets of the world, and also giving them the opportunity to export goods to another countries. Globalization covers since cultural to historical ideas. This phenomenon emerged due to the need of world power countries to expand their market, and as a support to European countries destroyed by the World War II. One of the first signs of globalization is the technology advances, like the first commercial laptop, the Toshiba T1100, fabricated by Toshiba in 1986. This was considered as the first laptop ever mass-produced. Another one was the start of the smartphone era. This caused a major uprise of the globalization in the entire world. The iPhone, considered one of the most important events of human history, revolutionized the technology, the economy, and the social life of people around the globe. The terrorism is a thing that governments around the world face. This is the justified oppression and inexcusable abomination. This can be considered always bad, but it depends on whose point of view is analyzed. This word is defined as the use of unlawful violence or threat of unlawful violence to inculcate fear and intimidate governments or societies in the pursuit of goals that are political, religious, or ideological. When you hear terrorism, you might think in Al Qaeda. This is the most infamous terrorist organization in the world, founded by Osama bin Laden. This group is known for being the ones that blew up the Twin Towers in New York in 2001. The differences in ideological thoughts and religious ones may have caused the terrorism attacks in the 20th century, leading the world to a constant war versus terrorism. So here's a short video explaining the today's terrorism.
Oh dear, just when you thought the Iraq problem was solved because you haven't heard about it for a while, everything's back to murderous chaos and terror. What happened? In 2003, the US invaded Iraq because of its alleged connections to terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. At the time, Saddam Hussein, a brutal dictator, ruled the country. He was part of the Sunni minority and suppressed the Shia majority. Iraq was conquered fairly quickly, but the US had no plan for the country. The until then suppressed Shia majority took over and began oppressing the Sunnis because suppressing other faiths has proven to be such a good idea. Unsurprisingly, a Sunni rebel uprising began and terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda trickled into Iraq, and local forces, often former Sunni military, began fighting the US troops and the newly formed Iraqi state, peaking in a bloody civil war in 2006. Since then, people in Iraq have basically been segregated by religion. So, in a tragic irony of history, the US invasion led to the formation of the very terrorists the US wanted to eliminate in the first place, because Iraq was now the perfect training ground for terrorism. To understand this complicated conflict better, we need to understand the relationship between the two main branches of the Muslim faith, Shia and Sunni Islam. Sunnis make up about 80% of the Muslim world and Shia about 20%. And the hardliners on both sides don't like each other very much. Saudi Arabia and Iran are the two most powerful players in the game of faiths. They both have no separation of state and religion, domestic problems, and a lot of oil money. And they support groups that fight the other religious orientation. And one of those terror organizations supported by Saudi Arabia was the Islamic State in Iraq, or ISI for short. In 2010, the Arab Spring happened and changed the whole situation in the Middle East. In Syria, dictator Bashar al-Assad didn't think much of resigning and started a gruesome civil war against his own people. The longer the war went on, the more foreign groups joined the fight, most of them for religious reasons and with the goal of building an Islamic State in the region. And one of them was the infamous ISI, which now became the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, or ISIS. They had fought in Iraq for years and had thousands of well-trained and fanatic soldiers. They already quasi-controlled parts of northern Iraq and were very determined to build their religious state. And they changed the game in Syria like no one expected. ISIS was so unbelievably violent and radical that soon it was at war with almost every other faction of the Syrian rebel armies. They attacked and killed members of other Muslim terrorist groups. In the territories they controlled, they built an Islamic State with rules so strict that even the hardliners of Al-Qaeda and Saudi Arabia were shocked and withdrew their support. ISIS has been accused of responsibility for multiple massacres against civilians, countless suicide bombings, the hostage-taking of women and children, the execution of their prisoners and beheadings. All kinds of medieval horrors we would rather not have to illustrate. And this lovely gathering of human beings recently decided it was time to take more territory in Iraq. Since the US left Iraq, the Shia Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has monopolized power and discriminated against Sunnis wherever possible. The government of Iraq is widely regarded as being corrupt, incapable, and it's certainly hated by a large part of its citizens. The Iraqi army, consisting of about 300,000 soldiers, was created using $25 billion in tax money, but it's not loyal to its government and has been withdrawing or completely disbanding, giving up city after city. Because ISIS has announced that everyone who opposes them will be killed, they have proven they mean business. By June 2014, they'd conquered a big chunk of Iraq, including Mosul, Iraq's second largest city. They'd stolen hundreds of millions from captured banks, making them the richest terror organization on earth. And they are constantly working on establishing a super medieval religious state. Iran and the US are even considering working together to fight them. That's how gruesome the situation is. Events in Iraq show again that exploiting the people you've defeated in a war, denying them power, a living and a stake in the rebuilding of the country, is just sowing the seeds of the next bout of violence. Somehow, we have to break this circle.
Since the World War II, the war was divided in two parts, the one that supported the US and the ones that supported the USSR. But it changed with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the USSR. After this, the US was trying to turn our world into an unipolar world, where the only power will be the US. The end of the Cold War meant the opportunity of the US to mark differences from the Soviet economy and pass over the USSR in military power, among other things. One of the events of the US trying to letting us to know that there is only one world power is the invasion of Afghanistan. In 2001, the US invaded Afghanistan as a part of its war on terrorism, looking for revenge from the World Trade Center attack. The US demonstrated its military power to the entire world, broadcasting the war zones, among other things. Today, the Russian President Putin accused the US for trying to create an unipolar world due to the constant struggles of the US trying to govern the Middle East. This is the era that we live today, also known as the information age. This is the phase where the human has direct contact with the technology that he'd created in first place, but the computers are part of the daily life of all people around the globe. Where the social media like Facebook unite the entire world, helping them to communicate with each other. The creation of the Internet triggered the beginning of the digital era. The Internet changed the society with the facilities of communication, doing the work very fast, replacing the old hardware from the antiquated technology, made the things easier. So, as a conclusion, I must say that the human knowledge has no limit. Day by day, the human will be discovering more and more things and causing things that will change the society. This is the thing that we must adapt to the change.